Bienvenidos al fin, mi gente. Welcome to the end. Well, as the cliche goes, the end is only really the beginning, right? Let's talk then about the beginning, how and why I embarked on this journey to Cuba. The messy, confusing mix of the personal and political, the synthesis of the thesis and antithesis of a concept that pulls from the unknown future and the murky past. A reaching out from a Caribbean island to Turtle Island on an island in the universe. A noise attempting to cut through the noise, trying to bring everything all at once, here and now. Let's talk about stories. Let's talk about Havana Syndrome.
Today, I can announce that the United States has agreed to formally reestablish diplomatic relations with the Republic of Cuba.
You know there's a story going around about the CIA and they're trying to get, sending in the folks to get Castro.
Cuba maintains close relations with Russia and China, providing these actors with influence platforms to foment an anti-American
The Florida
agenda.
State Court has ruled on the case regarding temporary custody of Elian Gonzalez.
I think you ought to have that. It's incredible. I don't believe there's a thing in the world to it, and I don't think we ought to seriously consider it, but I think you ought to know about it.
The progress that we mark today is yet another demonstration that we don't have to be imprisoned by the past. When something isn't working, we can and will change.
There is a longing for the past that permeates depictions of Cuba throughout U.S. culture. It also snapshots a particular time and place and particular perspectives. In the last few episodes, you heard some of the ways popular media has depicted Cuba, from The Godfather to Our Man in Havana. In this series, I've shared clips from movies and TV shows that depict Cuba and Cuban American culture. I'd like us to look at movies that glamorize Cuba.
Divided. Nobody's interested in high-stakes poker right now. We got a little confusion going on down here.
You think I care about any of this stuff?
Perhaps you do believe in something after all. Perhaps you believe in beautiful women, Mr. Wilde.
Havana, starring Robert Redford and the late, great Raul Julia. Uncredited, in fact, because the director wouldn't give him top billing alongside Redford. Of course, if it's not fear-mongering scary brown people in Scarface, or the latest docudrama about the Menendez brothers, or the Watergate scandal, it's romanticizing Cubans as hot Latin lovers. Or the comedic takes of Desi Arnaz.
Mira lo que le hizo el vestido. Mira lo que le pasó al vestido. Me dijo que tenía un size 12 y se lo puso y lo rompió todo. ¿Para qué se puso el vestido si sabía que no iba a caber, señora?
Gracias. I'll have that done tomorrow.
Let me see that.
I can count on one hand representation of Cuba and Cubans in modern popular culture. Like, within the last decade, I mean.
You may be thinking, what's a kinkajou doing playing music in Cuba? Don't you usually live in the rainforest? Maybe I fell in a ship and created as a baby. Next thing I knew, I was somewhere new. I wasn't singing the same chorus. All I remember was being hungry and running from somebody even hungrier.
Bernice. What? That all sounds great.
No, they're saying I only got in because I'm Cuban.
An award for being Cuban? Finally!
Make that 2 fingers, honestly. Don't get me wrong. One Day at a Time in particular was a revelation for me. It was the first time that such a huge part of my identity was represented so incredibly. And most of the actors were Puerto Rican. Rita Moreno is a national treasure. I hope you all know that. We systematically underestimate the creative economy in the face of traditional measurements of value in labor. In fact, this is the reason why you see in export measurements that the U.S.'s largest export is technically oil rather than media or entertainment. Even though oil and gas accounts for less than $200 billion in exports, the U.S. media and entertainment industry accounts for nearly $700 billion. We fear becoming uprooted, ungrounded when we try to value things that are intangible. ephemeral. This, of course, results in thinking to value one thing is to devalue another. There is no free lunch, after all. We still live like this, as if it's all a zero-sum game. Either Cuba succeeds in its revolution, or it fails and reverts to American-style capitalism. Either Havana syndrome is a conspiracy theory, or it's real. You know what's interesting? There's actually a long history of cinema in Cuba. Pre-revolution, Cuba had the third largest number of theaters in Latin America. The love of good storytelling, like baseball, is something that connects American and Cuban culture. Looking back at the history, it makes sense that there are so many things we do, in fact, share. We share a tradition of revolution, of great liberating thinkers and activists. We share the dual sins of genocide and slavery. We share the waters of the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. We share a deep, perhaps even cursed, sense of pride. Why is it then that we refuse to look in each other's eyes, cut each other off with declarations of political and economic incompatibility? What are we afraid to see? What are we afraid to hear? I can't help but feel that every ounce of our stories about Cuba is firmly stuck in the past. Even the ones portraying modern Cubans or Cuban Americans can't drag the storyline away from the opulent daydreams of the pre-revolution island. It's easier to hear this instead of the fact that right now, as I am writing this, Cuba has suffered a nationwide electrical grid failure. Oh, and there was a whole Salon article about how the CIA has been interfering with the Havana syndrome investigation, like a couple of weeks ago, came out, because, of course. We sometimes forget the power of storytelling, of truth-telling, until, of course, I go to look up the latest about the blackout, and the most recent article is from 5 days ago. And so I wonder, is this act of fictionalizing a culture actually worthwhile in the face of real issues? I often wrestle with reality. As a wordsmith and a story maker, I enjoy the balance of exploring fantastic worlds and finding truths hidden within. Like a Stormchaser, I branch out into the wilderness of fairy tales and frequently get swept off my feet, but truly with the desire to better understand the storm within. Like the weather, this story took a while to pin down. It could not be predicted, even as I pursued it. This story twisted and churned. I had so many names for it at first. And at first, it had nothing at all to do with Cuba. I wanted to make a broader story, one that tried to capture the feeling of being a third culture kid, of being from many cultures. It was a story I wanted to tell for years, because it was a story that I did not see captured anywhere. I interviewed my siblings, the only ones I knew personally who had been through what I went through. With their blessing, I brought forward all 3 of our experiences into the mix. After I finished Kalila Stormfire's Economical Magic Services' 3rd and final season, I worked on a few other projects while the seed of this story was still germinating. 2 books, one fictional, one nonfiction, neither published, an audio adaptation of someone else's play, another documentary podcast for work. All the while, the story that would become Havana syndrome simply turned, like the wisps of wind gathering off the Horn of Africa, a faint whisper of what was to come. I've gone back to look at the earliest mentions, actually, in a folder I aptly titled Awesome Writing Projects. I started the very first version of this story, just a brain dump, in May of 2020. It took 2 more years for the concept to finally coalesce into more or less what I was ready to write. And that same winter, I decided to take a writing retreat to Cuba. It was the same year I got married, and the same year I started working full-time with Stormfire Productions. 2022 was the year I went all in. No one else was doing what I wanted to do. I had no map, no set course. I had to trust that it mattered what I was doing. Even after certain Hollywood and big buck studios flirted with this particular production, In the end, it was up to me. I had to have the courage to cross the border, to put pen to paper, to say what had been unsaid, to save up money to pay my actors and apply to a residency, to have the time and space to do this fucking thing. Because I am tired of stories stuck in a past that ignores the present and sabotages the future. For the US and Cuba, I'm hopeful that my chosen path as a storyteller, a path that aims for freedom in myself and the people I love, is a fruitful one. I may not have all the answers to whether or not this is actually going to be worth it at the end, another 2 whole years later, but I am but a simple, humble Stormchaser. And now, without further ado, here is the official trailer for my new spy thriller podcast and alternative reality game, Havana Syndrome. Now available to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 6 years ago, I was recruited as an operations officer within the clandestine service of the Central Intelligence Agency.
She's her sister. She's in trouble. What if she needs your help?
It's not just the FBI, Dee. There are probably international intelligence agencies who figured this out. And who knows who else Junie told about all this.
You need our information as much as we need yours.
You must have stumbled upon a real good secret. But don't worry, it won't be a secret for long.
So I'm sending this before they can get to you, before they even know where I went.
In fact, there seems to be some chatter about Havana Syndrome that I had not yet been made aware of. I don't know if it'll be a wild goose chase, but perhaps something will link back to Juniper.
That reminds me of an old proverb. If you chase 2 rabbits, both will escape.
I need to find the source, the truth. I know how to find it, where to find it.
Spycraft requires a level of mental hardness and ruthlessness.
Screw Junie for dropping this on our heads. Let her clean up her own mess.
I don't know when I'll be able to speak again. It sounds like... It sounds...
Havana Syndrome, a spy thriller and alternative reality game. First episode premieres November 28th, 2024, Thanksgiving Day. The clues are already here.